The emergency lights flickered red across the empty platform as Maya Okonkwo stepped off the supply shuttle. Station Epsilon 7 looked even more desolate than the photo suggested. Built 50 years ago on the edge of known space, the station served as an automated waypoint for ships traveling through the Kepler Traverse. Most engineers hated this assignment. 3 months alone with nothing but humming machinery and the distant roar of the transit tunnels. Maya didn't mind. After what happened to her family, she preferred the company of machines. Her boots echoed on the metal deck as she walked toward the control center. The station was massive, built to house a crew of 50, but budget cuts had reduced operations to a single rotating engineer. Her job was simple: maintain the equipment, monitor the wormhole network, and make sure ships could pass through safely. She had done this rotation 6 times before. It was predictable, safe, lonely in a way that felt comfortable. The control panels lit up as she entered the main hub. Everything showed green. The reactor hummed steadily below her feet. The transit tunnel network displayed as a web of blue lines on the main screen, connecting 17 star systems through carefully maintained wormholes. Maya set down her bag and began the standard system checks. Oxygen recyclers, water purification, power distribution, navigation beacons. All normal. She was reviewing the maintenance logs when the first alarm sounded. A soft chime, easily ignored. Solar activity detected in the nearby system. Maya pulled up the data. A moderate flare, nothing the station couldn't handle. She logged it and continued working. 20 minutes later, the second alarm came. This one was louder. The flare had intensified. The wormhole network was experiencing minor fluctuations. Maya's fingers moved quickly across the controls, adjusting the stabilizers. The tunnel network was delicate, requiring constant small corrections to maintain the pathways through folded space. A strong enough disruption could collapse a tunnel entirely, stranding ships between stars. She had trained for this scenario 100 times. The third alarm brought her to her feet. The entire board flashed red. The solar flare had become a full coronal mass ejection, and it was hitting the station's sector like a hammer. The wormhole network twisted and bucked. On the screen, 3 tunnels collapsed simultaneously. Ships in transit were automatically rerouted, but the system was failing fast. Maya's hands flew across the controls trying to compensate, but it was like trying to hold back an ocean with a bucket. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in after 3 terrifying seconds of darkness. Half the station systems were offline. The main reactor was fluctuating. Life support had switched to backup batteries. Maya ran a diagnostic and felt her stomach drop. She had maybe 72 hours of air and power left. The communication array was completely fried. No distress signal. No way to call for help. And with the tunnel network in chaos, no ship could reach her anyway. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic killed more people in space than equipment failure, she needed to think. First priority was life support. Second was the reactor. If it went critical, nothing else would matter. She grabbed her toolkit and headed for the engineering bay. The lower decks were dark except for the red emergency strips along the floor. The station groaned around her, metal expanding and contracting as systems failed and rerouted. Maya had always found the sounds comforting before, like the breathing of some great mechanical beast. Now they sounded ominous. Warning signs of coming collapse. The engineering bay was a disaster. Coolant leaked from a ruptured pipe pooling on the floor. Several panels had blown out, spilling their burned components across the deck. Maya waded through the mess, assessing the damage. It was bad, but not impossible. She could reroute power, bypass the damaged sections, maybe buy herself a few more days. Long enough for the tunnel network to stabilize. Long enough for a rescue ship to reach her. She was pulling components from a storage locker when she heard it. A soft sound barely audible over the hiss of leaking coolant. A whimper. Maya froze. The station was automated. There shouldn't be any living thing here except her. She grabbed a plasma torch from her belt, igniting it to provide light and protection, and followed the sound. In the far corner of the bay, partially hidden behind a stack of cargo crates, sat a damaged containment pod. It was leaking some kind of coolant or cryogenic fluid, creating a fog that spilled across the floor. The pod was expensive, the kind used to transport delicate living cargo, and it was open. Maya approached carefully. The whimpering came again, weak and frightened. Inside the pod, huddled against the back wall, were 2 small creatures, They looked almost like cats, but their fur was longer and had an iridescent quality that shifted colors in the light. Their eyes were too large, too intelligent. Their ears were elongated and tufted, and they were shivering violently, their small bodies racked with cold. Maya recognized them immediately, though she had never seen one in person. Felinar. Everyone knew the story. An entire species wiped out when their sun went nova 20 years ago. The last of a race that had once been the galaxy's greatest navigators, able to sense and traverse wormholes with an instinct that no technology could match. These two cubs shouldn't exist. They couldn't exist, but they did, and they were dying. Maya didn't hesitate. Protocol said to report any stowaways, to maintain quarantine, to wait for proper authority. Protocol could go to hell. She shed her heavy engineering jacket and scooped up the cubs. They were so cold their fur felt like ice. They struggled weakly, too frightened and frozen to fight effectively. Maya wrapped them in her jacket and tucked them against her chest, then pulled up the thermal hood of her undersuit, creating a warm pocket. The cubs squirmed for a moment, then seemed to realize she was warm. They burrowed deeper into the hood, pressing against the back of her neck. Their shivering gradually slowed. After a few minutes, she felt something that made her throat tighten, a soft vibration against her skin. They were purring. An explosion rocked the station. Maya stumbled, catching herself against a support beam. The reactor was getting worse. She looked down at the cubs barely visible in her hood, then at the chaos of the engineering bay. She was stranded on a dying station with maybe 3 days to live, and now she was responsible for the last 2 members of an extinct species. Maya had always believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't intelligence or technology. It was stubbornness, the sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up even when the universe said it was over. She had lost her husband and daughter to a transit accident 5 years ago. She had survived when she wanted to die. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece into someone who could function, who could help others, who could make sure what happened to her family didn't happen to anyone else. She wasn't going to lose anyone else. Not today. Not ever again if she could help it. Maya adjusted the cubs in her hood, making sure they were secure and warm. Then she picked up her tools and went to work. The station might be dying, but she was human, and humans didn't know how to quit. The first day was about survival. Maya worked 18 hours straight, her hands covered in burns and cuts, the cubs sleeping fitfully in her hood. She managed to stabilize the reactor enough to buy herself time. Not much, maybe 4 days instead of 3. But every hour mattered. She rerouted life support to focus on the engineering bay and the small crew quarters next to it. The rest of the station could go dark. The cubs woke when she finally stopped to eat. They crawled out of her hood and watched her with those enormous eyes. Their pupils dilated in the dim light. Maya opened a ration pack and tried to figure out what to feed them. She had no idea what Felinar ate. The station database had information on thousands of species, but the Felinar entry was marked as historical data. Extinct species. No care instructions needed. She tried offering them some of her protein bar. They sniffed it cautiously, then turned away. She tried the dried fruit. Same response. When she opened a pack of emergency fish supplement, both cubs perked up immediately. They ate delicately, almost politely, taking small bites from her hand. Their rough tongues tickled her palm. When they finished, they cleaned their faces with tiny paws and looked at her expectantly. "I'm calling you Nova," Maya said, pointing to the slightly larger cub with silver-tipped fur, "and you're Comet." The smaller one had a dark streak down its back like a tail of light. The cubs tilted their heads at the sounds but didn't react. She wasn't even sure they could understand human speech, but talking to them made her feel less alone. That night, curled up in her bunk with both cubs pressed against her stomach, Maya finally had time to think. Someone had put these cubs in that containment pod. Someone had brought them to this station. The pod was damaged, which meant it had been here during the solar storm. A legitimate transport would have been logged in the station's records. Maya pulled up the cargo manifests on her tablet, scrolling back through the last month of docking records. There, 3 weeks ago, a private cargo ship had docked for 6 hours, claiming they needed to repair a coolant leak. They had requested access to the engineering bay. The captain's name was listed as merchant vessel, Prophet's Edge, registered out of the Korthian colonies. Maya felt her jaw tighten. The Korthians were known for skirting the edge of legal commerce, sometimes crossing it entirely. They had left the cubs here, Whether they meant to come back or had abandoned them when their containment pod was damaged, Maya didn't know. What she did know was that someone had been transporting the last living Felinar. The cubs weren't just rare, they were priceless and illegal. The Interspecies Protection Act made trafficking in extinct or endangered species a capital offense. Nova made a soft chirping sound in her sleep, and Maya gently stroked the cub's fur. It was softer than anything she had ever touched, and it seemed to shimmer slightly under her fingers. Both cubs had stopped shivering. Their breathing was steady and deep. They trusted her. The thought was both warming and terrifying. The second day brought a new problem. The wormhole network was getting worse instead of better. On the main screen in the control center, Maya watched as another tunnel collapsed, then another. The entire Kepler traverse was becoming unstable. Ships were avoiding the region entirely, which meant even when the station's communication array was repaired, rescue might be days or weeks away. She was running out of time. She was studying the sensor data when Nova jumped onto the console. The cub had been following her around all morning, always staying close. Now Nova stared at the screen showing the wormhole network. Her ears pricked forward. She made a low sound, almost like a growl, and patted the screen with one paw. She touched a specific point where two tunnels intersected. Maya frowned. "What is it?" Nova looked at her, then back at the screen. She touched the point again, more insistently. Comet jumped up beside her sister and touched a different point. Both cubs were focused on the screen with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. On a hunch, Maya pulled up the detailed sensor readings for the points the cubs had touched. Her breath caught. Both locations showed unusual fluctuations, a specific harmonic resonance that her instruments had flagged as minor anomalies. But they weren't minor. They were the early signs of a tunnel about to collapse. The cubs could sense it. "You can feel the wormholes," Maya whispered. The cubs looked at her with those intelligent eyes. Of course they could. The Felinar had evolved on a world near a natural wormhole cluster. Their entire species had developed an instinctual understanding of space-time distortions. They had been the galaxy's navigators not because of technology, but because they could feel the shape of folded space the way Maya could feel heat or cold. She spent the rest of the day testing her theory. She would pull up random sections of the wormhole network, and the cubs would invariably point to the areas of greatest instability. They were never wrong, not once. It was like they could see something she couldn't, some fundamental structure of reality that her instruments could only guess at. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk with the cubs curled against her, listening to their purring, and thought about the Felinar. The history files said they had died when their sun went nova, but Maya knew better now. She accessed the restricted files, using her engineering override codes. The truth was there, hidden in classified reports. 20 years ago, the wormhole network around Felinar space had begun to collapse. It would have killed millions across a dozen systems. The Felinar, with their natural ability to sense and influence space-time, had worked together to stabilize the network. It had taken every adult member of their species, all of them channeling their abilities in perfect harmony. They had saved countless lives, and it had killed them. Every single adult Felinar had died holding the tunnels open long, enough for other species to evacuate and for engineers to implement permanent stabilizers. The Felinar hadn't gone, extinct because of a natural disaster. They had chosen extinction to save everyone else. Maya felt tears running down her cheeks. She understood that choice. She would have made the same one to save her family. Anyone who loved something more than themselves would. And now these two cubs, maybe the very last of their kind, were sleeping in her arms while she tried desperately to keep them alive on a dying station. The universe had a cruel sense of irony. The third day started with another alarm. The reactor was entering the red zone. Maya had maybe 24 hours before it went critical and exploded, taking the entire station with it. She worked frantically, pulling parts from every system she could spare, trying to jury-rig a solution that would buy just a little more time. Nova and Comet stayed close, seeming to sense her distress. They took turns riding in her hood or perching on her shoulders while she worked. Their presence was oddly calming. When she felt panic rising, their purring would bring her back to focus. When her hands shook from exhaustion, their soft fur under her fingers reminded her why she had to keep going. She was rewiring a power junction when Comet suddenly hissed. Both cubs went rigid, their fur standing on end. Maya froze. What is it? The cubs stared at the ceiling at nothing Maya could see. Then she heard it. The distant rumble of engines. A ship was approaching the station. For a moment, Maya felt pure relief. Rescue. She started toward the communication panel, ready to signal the ship, ready to be saved. Then she stopped. The cubs were still tense, still afraid, and Maya's instincts, honed by years of surviving in space, were screaming warnings. A legitimate rescue ship would have announced itself. This ship was approaching silently, using minimal power like it didn't want to be detected. Maya pulled up the external sensors. The ship was medium-sized, heavily modified with no official markings. Her blood ran cold when she checked its configuration against the database. It matched the profile of the Prophet's Edge, the Corthian cargo ship that had left the cubs here. They had come back. And Maya had a sinking feeling they weren't here to perform a rescue. Maya grabbed both cubs and shoved them into her hood, ignoring their startled squeaks. "Stay quiet," she whispered, knowing they probably didn't understand but hoping her tone would convey the urgency. She killed the lights in the engineering bay and moved quickly through the darkened corridors to the control center. Her mind raced. The station was dying. She had no weapons, no way to call for help, and whoever was on that ship had left two priceless cubs here to die. They weren't the rescuing type. The ship docked with a hard clang that shook the station's frame. Maya watched on the monitors as the airlock cycled. 5 figures emerged, all wearing salvage suits and carrying equipment. And weapons. Definitely weapons. She recognized the distinctive bulk of plasma cutters and the sleeker profiles of shock rifles. These weren't engineers coming to help. They were here to claim something valuable. The leader was a Corthian, tall and reptilian with mottled green scales. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. The others were a mix of species, the kind of crew you found on the edges of legal space. They spread out efficiently, checking rooms, scanning for life signs. Maya had maybe 5 minutes before they found her. She could hide. The station was huge, and they didn't know the layout as well as she did. But where would she go? Every functioning section was on the same life support system. They would find her eventually. And the reactor was going to explode in less than a day. Running would only delay the inevitable. The cubs shifted in her hood, their small bodies pressed against her neck. Nova's purring was barely audible, a frightened vibration that made Maya's decision for her. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to run. She was going to negotiate. And if that didn't work, she was going to fight. Maya stepped out of the control center just as the Corthian rounded the corner. He stopped, his large eyes blinking in surprise. Then he smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Well, this is unexpected." The station was supposed to be automated. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. Maya didn't trust it for a second. "It is automated," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just the maintenance engineer. Name's Maya Okonkwo." "And you are?" "Captain Vrek of the Prophet's Edge." He gestured to his crew who had appeared from various corridors, all with weapons ready. "We're here on salvage business. The station's been declared a loss by your company. We have the legal right to strip it for parts." It was a lie. Maya knew it, and Rek knew she knew it. But he was going through the motions, establishing a pretense of legitimacy. She played along. "That's strange. I haven't received any notification about salvage rights. My communication array is damaged, but my company protocols would require direct confirmation before abandoning a station." Rek's smile widened. "Communications are tricky in this region. Perhaps the message simply didn't get through." He took a step closer. "But that's not important right now. What's important is that you're in danger. This station is going to explode. We can save you. All we ask in return is that you tell us if you found anything valuable during your time here. Any cargo, perhaps? Any unusual items left behind by previous visitors?" So there it was. He wanted the cubs. Maya forced herself to shrug casually. "Just spare parts and broken equipment. Nothing valuable. This is a transit station, not a warehouse." Frek's eyes narrowed. "Are you certain?" "My sensors indicate you're running life support to only a small section of the station. Very specific sections, almost like you're protecting something." He pulled out a handheld scanner and pointed it at Maya. The device beeped softly. "And your thermal signature is unusual. It appears there are multiple heat sources concentrated around your upper body." Maya's hand moved to her plasma torch, but Vrek was faster. He raised one hand and his crew brought their weapons up, all pointed at her. Please don't be foolish. We're not here to hurt you. We're here for our property. Property that was left on this station by mistake. Property, Maya repeated, her voice flat. You mean the 2 Felinar cubs you abandoned in a damaged containment pod? Vrek had the decency to look uncomfortable for a moment. The pod was functioning when we left. The solar storm must have damaged it. But yes, we're here for the Felinar. They're extremely valuable, you understand. Worth more than this entire station. Worth more than your life, frankly, though I'd prefer not to make that trade. They're living beings, Maya said. Children. The last of their entire species. They're an investment, Rek corrected. Do you have any idea what certain parties would pay for creatures that can navigate wormholes instinctively? They're worth millions. Each. And there are people who would pay even more for the genetic material to create more. Maya felt sick. The Interspecies Protection Act makes trafficking in endangered species punishable by life imprisonment. You're talking about a death sentence. Only if I'm caught, Rek said. And out here in the collapsed Kepler Traverse, there's no one to catch me. Now, I'm going to make this very simple. Give me the cubs and I'll take you with us. You'll live. You might even get a small finder's fee. Refuse and I'll take the cubs anyway and you can die when this station explodes. The cubs were trembling in Maya's hood. She could feel their small hearts beating rapidly against her neck. Nova made a tiny sound, quickly muffled. They understood danger even if they didn't understand words. Maya looked at Rek, at his crew, at the weapons pointed at her. She thought about her husband and daughter, about the accident that had killed them, about how she had been powerless to save them. But she wasn't powerless now. She was human, and humans had a particular talent for doing the impossible when they were desperate enough. I have a counteroffer, Maya said. Vrek raised one scaly eyebrow. The wormhole network is completely unstable. You can't navigate out of this sector safely. Your ship's computer can't predict the fluctuations. But the cubs can. They can sense the safe paths through the tunnels. So they can, Vrek agreed. Which is why we need them. You need them alive and cooperative, Maya continued. They're terrified right now. Traumatized. If you take them by force, they'll shut down. They won't help you. But if I come with you, if they trust me, they'll guide us out. All of us, Vrek considered this. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Safe passage out of the Traverse. For me and the cubs, you drop us at the nearest coalition station and you go your way, we go ours. You expect me to believe you won't report this the moment we separate? Maya met his eyes steadily. I expect you to believe that I care more about keeping those cubs alive than I care about justice. Because it's true. I'll make you a deal, witnessed by your entire crew. You get us out safely. You let us go unharmed, and I'll give you a 6-hour head start before I report anything. 6 hours is enough for a ship like yours to disappear into the outer colonies. It was a lie, of course. Maya had no intention of letting Rek go free. But she needed him to believe it. She needed him to think she was just a frightened engineer trying to survive. She saw Rek weighing the options. He could take the cubs by force, but Maya was right that they wouldn't cooperate. Or he could accept her offer, use the cubs to escape, and then decide what to do with Maya later. From his perspective, he held all the power. He could agree now and betray her later. 6 hours, Vrek said finally. You have a deal. He extended his hand. Maya shook it, feeling the dry scales against her palm. But understand this, Engineer Okonkwo. If you try anything, if those cubs don't perform as promised, I will space you without hesitation. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Maya said. She had no doubt he meant it. She also had no doubt that he planned to kill her anyway once they were safely out of the Traverse. But that was fine. She had no intention of making it that easy for him. They had 2 hours to prepare before the reactor went critical. Vrek's crew helped Maya transfer essential equipment to the Prophet's Edge. She used the time to subtly sabotage what she could, rerouting systems, adjusting calibrations, making small changes that wouldn't be noticed immediately, but would cause problems later. She also managed to activate the station's emergency beacon, setting it to broadcast on all frequencies once the reactor exploded. It wouldn't save her, but it might bring help for someone else. It might alert the coalition to what had happened here. Nova and Comet stayed in her hood the entire time, occasionally peeking out with frightened eyes. Maya kept up a steady stream of quiet reassurance, telling them stories about Earth, about cats and dogs and animals that had never seen the stars. She didn't know if they understood, but they seemed to calm slightly at the sound of her voice. As they boarded the Prophet's Edge, Maya took one last look at Station Epsilon 7. It had been her sanctuary for years, a place where she could work and grieve and slowly rebuild herself. Now it was a tomb waiting to happen. She felt a pang of loss, but also something else. Determination. She had saved the cubs from that station. Now she just had to save them from wreck. The ship detached with a shudder. Through the viewports, Maya could see the transit tunnel entrance, a swirling vortex of distorted space. The wind roared through it, a sound that registered on sensors as a deep, impossible vibration. Inside that tunnel, normal physics stopped applying. Time and space folded and twisted. Most pilots needed complex calculations and careful navigation to survive. Maya gently lifted Nova and Comet from her hood and set them on the navigation console. The cubs looked tiny on the massive panel, their iridescent fur catching the light from the displays. The bridge crew watched with a mixture of curiosity and greed. To them, these were tools. Valuable tools, but tools nonetheless. Maya wanted to protect the cubs from those stares, but she needed them to perform. Their survival depended on it. "Show them," she whispered to Nova, touching the display showing the tunnel entrance. The cub looked up at her with those enormous eyes, then back at the screen. For a long moment, nothing happened. Maya's heart sank. What if the cubs didn't understand? What if they were too young or too traumatized to help? Then Nova raised one small paw and touched the screen, dragging her paw in a specific arc. Comet joined her, and together they traced a path through the swirling chaos. The ship's computer processed their movements, translating the physical gestures into navigation coordinates. A route appeared on the screen, threading through impossible angles and fluctuations. Freck leaned forward, studying it. "That can't be right. The computer says this path goes through 3 different spatial anomalies. It should tear the ship apart." "Your computer doesn't understand wormhole physics the way they do," Maya said. She hoped she sounded confident. Truth was, she was guessing, but the cubs had been right about every instability on the station. She had to trust them now. Follow their path exactly. Don't deviate even slightly. Freck hesitated, then nodded to his pilot. "Do it, but slowly. The moment things look wrong, we abort." The pilot's hands moved across the controls and the ship edged toward the tunnel entrance. The roar grew louder, felt more than heard. It was the sound of reality being compressed and stretched, folded into impossible shapes. Maya had been through transit tunnels dozens of times, but they were always carefully maintained, stable paths. This was different. This was chaos. The ship crossed the threshold and the universe went insane. Through the viewports, Maya saw colors that didn't exist, shapes that hurt to look at. Time felt wrong, like it was moving in multiple directions at once. The crew gripped their stations, several of them looking sick. Maya felt her stomach lurch, but she forced herself to focus on the cubs. Nova and Comet were completely calm. They sat on the console, their heads tilted slightly, their ears twitching. They were listening to something Maya couldn't hear, feeling something she couldn't sense. Every few seconds they would touch the screen, adjusting the path. The pilot followed their directions with increasing confidence. The ship twisted and dove, rolling through spatial distortions that should have been impossible to navigate. Maya watched the cubs with wonder. This was what they were meant to do. This was the purpose encoded in their DNA by millions of years of evolution. They weren't scared in here. They were home. She saw Nova purr, a sound of contentment that seemed impossible in this nightmare of warped space. Comet responded, and their purring synchronized into a harmony that Maya felt in her bones. Something changed. The chaotic roar of the tunnel seemed to quiet slightly around the ship. The displays steadied. Maya realized with shock that the cubs weren't just sensing the safe path. They were creating it. Their harmonic purring was affecting the space-time distortions around them, creating a pocket of relative stability. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was real. "This is incredible," the pilot breathed. "We're moving 3 times faster than normal tunnel transit speed, and the ride is smoother than any stabilized tunnel I've ever used." Rex stood up, moving closer to the cubs. His eyes gleamed with avarice. "Do you understand what this means? With these creatures, we could navigate anywhere. We could find routes no one else knows. We could access systems that are considered unreachable." Maya stepped between Rek and the cubs. "They're not tools. They're children." Rek's smile was cold. "They're both. And they're mine." He turned to his crew. Once we're clear of the Traverse, take Okonkwo to the cargo hold and lock her in. We don't need her anymore. Maya had expected this. She had prepared for it. But hearing the words still sent ice through her veins. She glanced at the cubs, who were watching the exchange with alert eyes. They might not understand words, but they understood tone. They understood danger. Nova's purring stuttered. The ship lurched as the stabilization field flickered. "Wait," the pilot said urgently. "Something's wrong. The tunnel's destabilizing around us." Rek turned back to the viewports. The relative calm was gone. Reality was twisting again, worse than before. What happened? "They're scared," Maya said quietly. "I told you. They need to trust me. They need to feel safe. Threaten me, and they can't focus." It was partially true. But Maya had also noticed something during the transit. The cubs responded to her emotions. When she was calm, they were calm. When she was frightened, they became agitated. And their emotional state affected their ability to stabilize the tunnel. Rek's expression darkened. "Are you threatening me, engineer?" "I'm explaining reality," Maya said. "You can kill me, but then you'll die in this tunnel. Or you can keep your word and let us go when we reach safe space. Your choice." The ship shuddered. Alarms began blaring. The pilot was fighting the controls, but they were caught in a spatial riptide, being pulled toward a fluctuation that would crush them. Frek looked from Maya to the cubs to the chaotic viewports. "Fine," he snarled. "Calm them down now." Maya moved to the console and gently stroked Nova's head. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm here. We're safe. Show us the way out." The cub leaned into her touch and her purring resumed. Comet joined in. The harmonics built again and the ship's wild tumbling slowed. The pilot found their vector and followed the cub's new path away from the danger. They traveled deeper into the tunnel. Maya lost track of time. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. The only constant was the cubs, their steady guidance and their purring. She kept her hand on them, providing comfort and connection. She also used the time to study the ship's systems. The Prophet's Edge was old but well-maintained, modified heavily from its original design. Maya recognized some of the work. Black market upgrades, the kind that made a ship faster and harder to track, but also more fragile. She noticed the weapon systems were extensive for a cargo ship. And the holding cells in the lower deck were designed for living cargo. This wasn't Rek's first trafficking operation. Maya felt her resolve harden. Even if she kept her word about the 6-hour head start, she would make sure the Coalition knew about this ship, about what Rek had done, about what he planned to do with Nova and Comet. The tunnel journey took 4 hours, though the ship's clocks insisted it had been 20 minutes. Time dilation was normal in wormhole transit, but this was extreme. When they finally emerged into normal space, Maya felt the change like a physical release. The roaring stopped. The colors returned to normal. Her stomach settled. "We made it," the pilot said, disbelief in his voice. "We actually made it." Frek was staring at the cubs with naked greed. "Plot a course to the outer reach stations. We need to contact our buyer." He turned to Maya. "As for you, I'll honor my agreement. We'll drop you at the nearest Coalition station. You and the cubs." Maya didn't believe him for a second, but she nodded. "Thank you." She scooped up Nova and Comet, tucking them back into her hood. They went willingly, curling against her neck. She could feel their exhaustion. The tunnel transit had drained them. They needed food and rest and safety, things she couldn't guarantee while they were still on this ship. Breck gestured to one of his crew. "Escort Okonkwo to guest quarters. Make sure she's comfortable." The guard was a human, a woman with scars on her face and cold eyes. She led Maya through the corridors to a small cabin. It was clean but sparse. A bunk, a small desk, a locked door, a prison cell with better decoration. "Food will be brought in an hour," the guard said. "Don't try anything stupid." The door sealed behind her with a magnetic lock. Maya immediately checked the room for surveillance. She found 3 cameras and disabled 2 of them subtly, making it look like equipment failure rather than sabotage. She left one active so they wouldn't get suspicious. Then she sat on the bunk and let Nova and Comet out of her hood. The cubs immediately curled up on the thin mattress, their small bodies pressed together. They looked so vulnerable. Maya felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. These cubs had lost everything. Their world, their people, their future. They had been trafficked, abandoned, nearly frozen to death. And now they were prisoners on a ship full of people who saw them as merchandise. But they had her. And she had a plan. It was still a terrible plan, but it was evolving. She had seen how the cubs could affect the wormholes. She had felt their power during the transit. And she had noticed something else. When their purring synchronized, when they worked together in perfect harmony, they could do more than just navigate. They could manipulate space-time itself. The Felinar had sacrificed themselves to stabilize the wormhole network 20 years ago. They had channeled their collective power to hold reality together long enough to save millions. Maya didn't know if two cubs could do the same. But she knew they were far more powerful than Rek realized. And she knew that humans had a long history of using desperate measures to protect the people they loved. She lay down on the bunk with the... Maya woke to the sound of weapons fire. She sat up fast, instinctively covering the cubs with her body. Through the cabin walls, she heard shouting and the distinct crack of shock rifles. An attack, pirates? Then she heard Rek's voice over the ship's intercom, calm and commanding. All hands to defensive positions. We have coalition forces attempting to board. Prepare for combat. The coalition had found them. Maya's emergency beacon from the station must have worked. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fear. The Prophet's Edge was heavily armed, and Rek wouldn't surrender without a fight. She and the cubs were trapped in the middle of a battle. The cabin door's lock disengaged with a click. The scarred guard from before stood in the doorway, shock rifle in hand. Captain wants you on the bridge, move. Maya picked up the cubs, tucking them carefully into her hood, and followed. The corridors were chaotic. Crew members ran past carrying weapons and equipment. The ship shuddered from impact, and somewhere deep in the hull an explosion echoed. They were losing. Good. The bridge was a scene of controlled panic. Rek stood at the center, watching multiple displays showing coalition ships surrounding them. 3 cruisers, all with weapons locked. Maya recognized the lead ship's designation.
CNS Valiant.
A heavy assault cruiser. Someone had taken her beacon very seriously. Engineer Okonkwo, Rek said without turning. I'm afraid our agreement is off. The coalition is demanding we surrender and hand over all crew and cargo for inspection, including you and the cubs. He finally looked at her and his expression was cold. I have a different plan. We're going back into the tunnel. The coalition ships can't follow us through unstable space. Your cubs are going to navigate us out of this trap. They're exhausted, Maya said. They can barely stand. Pushing them now could kill them. It was true. The cubs were limp in her hood, their earlier energy completely drained. But it also bought her time to think. Rek's plan wouldn't work. The coalition would follow them into the tunnel. But they would follow carefully, slowly, and in the chaos of the tunnel anything could happen. Then I suggest you motivate them, Rek said. He pulled out a small plasma pistol and pointed it at Maya. Because if they don't perform, I'll space you and figure out how to control them myself. I won't get rich from this venture, but I can at least escape to profit another day. The pilot's hands were already moving, turning the ship back toward the nearest tunnel entrance. Coalition ships fired warning shots that splashed harmlessly against the shields. The Valiant was hailing them, demanding surrender. Maya moved to the navigation console. She set Nova and Comet down gently. They looked up at her with tired eyes, and her heart broke. They had been through so much. They deserved safety and peace, not this. But she needed them one more time. Just once more. She leaned close and whispered, too quietly for the bridge crew to hear. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Nova chirped softly. Comet pressed against her sister. They were listening. Maya touched the display showing the tunnel entrance. Take us in. But this time I need you to do something different. When I say I need you to sing as loud as you can, like you did in the tunnel before. Can you do that? She had no idea if they understood. But both cubs touched the screen, tracing a path. The ship accelerated toward the tunnel. The coalition ships followed, their hails becoming more urgent. Then they crossed the threshold and reality twisted. The roar engulfed them. Maya gripped the console as the ship began its impossible dance through folded space. The cubs guided them deeper, following paths that made the displays scream warnings. The coalition ships fell behind, unable to match their speed. Rek was smiling. He thought he had won. Maya waited, counting seconds, watching the tunnel's structure on the sensors. She needed the perfect moment. A place where the space-time distortions were at their most intense. A place where a small change could create a massive effect. There, a convergence point where 3 separate wormholes intersected. The ship was heading straight for it. In normal circumstances, the cubs would navigate around it. Such convergences were catastrophically unstable, but Maya had seen what the cubs could do when they worked in harmony. She had felt their power, and she had studied the reports of what the adult Felinar had done 20 years ago. Now, she whispered to the cubs, "Sing." Nova and Comet looked at her. Then they opened their mouths and sang. It wasn't a sound that should have come from creatures so small. It was a harmonic resonance that Maya felt in her bones, in her teeth, in the deepest parts of her body. The bridge crew clapped hands over their ears. The ship's hull vibrated, and the wormhole structure around them began to change. The chaotic roar of the tunnel transformed into something else. Something musical. The cubs' song resonated with the fabric of space-time itself, and the wormholes responded. The convergence point ahead stabilized, the three separate tunnels merging into one. But it didn't stop there. The stability spread outward in a wave, affecting dozens of tunnels throughout the traverse. On the sensors, Maya watched in awe as the entire chaotic network began to organize itself, responding to the cubs' harmonics. "What are they doing?" Freck shouted over the sound. "Stop them!" Maya didn't answer. She was too busy working. While everyone else was distracted by the cubs' display, she had accessed the ship's systems. Her fingers flew across a secondary console, executing the sabotage she had been planning since they left the station. Override codes, system failures, carefully timed shutdowns, the ship's engines cut out, the weapon systems went offline. Life support switched to emergency backup. And most importantly, the helm controls locked completely. They were dead in space, drifting in a stabilized tunnel with no way to maneuver. Freck spun toward her, raising his pistol, but Maya had anticipated this. She had pulled the plasma torch from her belt, the one tool they had let her keep because it seemed harmless. She activated it and held it to the main power conduit running through the bridge. "Drop the weapon," she said, "or I burn through this conduit and we lose all power, including life support." Freck's eyes narrowed. "You'll die too." Maya smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "I've lost everything I cared about once already. You think I'm afraid of dying? The only thing I'm afraid of is letting those cubs fall into your hands." She meant it. Freck could see that she meant it. He slowly lowered his pistol. The cubs' song reached a crescendo and then gradually faded. Nova and Comet slumped on the console, completely exhausted. But the tunnel around them remained stable. Impossibly, miraculously stable. And approaching through that stability came the CNS Valiant and its escorts, moving confidently through space that should have been impossible to navigate. The Valiant's captain appeared on the comm screen. She was a stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair and commander's insignia. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Coalition Navy. Unknown vessel. You are under arrest for suspected trafficking in endangered species, attempted murder, and violation of restricted space. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force." Freck looked at Maya, at the cubs, at his disabled ship. Then he looked at his crew. "Stand down," he said quietly. "It's over." The boarding was swift and professional. Coalition Marines flooded through the ship, securing the crew and taking them into custody. Maya watched from the bridge, still holding the cubs as Freck and his people were led away in restraints. Captain Rodriguez approached her personally. "Engineer Okonkwo?" Maya nodded. "I'm Captain Rodriguez. We picked up your emergency beacon from Station Epsilon 7. When we arrived and found the station destroyed but your shuttle missing, we feared the worst." "Can you tell me what happened?" Maya did. She explained everything from the solar storm to the cubs to Rex trafficking operation. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each detail. When Maya finished, the captain looked at Nova and Comet, who were watching her with cautious eyes from Maya's hood. "Are those really Felinar?" Rodriguez asked softly. "We thought they were extinct." Maya nodded. "They're the last ones, as far as I know." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "What you've done here, Okonkwo, saving an extinct species, exposing a major trafficking operation, stabilizing the Kepler-Travers wormhole network." She gestured at the displays showing the newly organized tunnels. "Do you understand what those cubs did? They've solved a navigation problem that's cost the Coalition billions in lost time and resources." "They're children," Maya said. "Not tools, not navigation aids. Children who need protection and a safe home." "Agreed," Rodriguez said. "And that's going to be complicated. The Coalition will want to study them, understand their abilities. Scientists will want access. Politicians will want to control them. Every major power in the galaxy will have an opinion about what should happen to the last Felinar. Maya felt her grip tighten protectively on the cubs. I won't let anyone use them. I won't let anyone hurt them. Rodriguez smiled. I don't think you'll have to. Because I'm recommending that the Coalition grant you full custodial rights to the cubs. You saved them. You protected them. You risked your life for them. As far as I'm concerned, you're their legal guardian.